site from home and just come down and show your game off at the end. The two sites are University of Denver and University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. One of those is a bit closer for you guys than the other, so a fairly obvious choice. And the whole point of Global Game Jam is it's aimed at all levels, so even if you've never made a game before, it's to meet people, it's to expand your network. So you get out, you spend a weekend, you find a group of people, they'll usually have icebreakers the day of, so you can kind of learn about everybody else and what their skills are, what they're interested in making. You find a team that kind of has the same interests as you, and yeah, you see if you can knock something out in 48 hours. Usually the teams, you'll have a designer, you'll have programmers, 3D modelers, different kinds of artists, you'll have sound designers, all kinds of interesting groups of people getting together and making a game. And yeah, at the end of it, everybody shows off what they've made. Usually half the teams finish their game, 2/3 of the teams finish their game, but everybody has a lot of fun, learns a lot. And yeah, we actually, if you go way back in our history, just down the street from you guys, who knows Boulder Games, Boulder Interactive? So Peggy and Chris, I believe, 6 or 7 years ago, met doing a game jam, and they started working on a robot golf game that they eventually turned into a commercial product and decided to make a studio. So yeah, it really does some wonderful things for the community, and I know there's a lot of folks who have sort of met their teams and met their friends. So if you're interested, I'd encourage it. Global Game Jam, again, coming up this week, not a lot of notice, but there are other game jams that we do here in Colorado. Who does Ludendare? A couple of folks. Who does a different jam? Global or local? Okay. So we do, actually, last year Sean ran a game jam, Rocky Mountain Game Devs. In previous years we've had Serenity Forge, also out of Boulder. So yeah, if you guys are kind of on the local list, if you're on the Game Dev Slack, and I'm sure Sean will also let you know when game jams come up, we will send out a blast to everybody and we'll all let you know if they're happening. I encourage you to try one at some point. Thank you.
Sweet. Thank you very much, Julian. All right. So I think we're good. I think everything's fine. If somebody could periodically check the live stream that I posted in the Slack, I'd greatly appreciate it, because that is the biggest pet peeve I've had so far. I'm terrible at production, so let's get this underway. So welcome to meeting number 5. Galvanize's mission statement. You know, I think you guys most of it know at this point, but they're a technology group, bunch of shared space office spaces. They do a lot of great talks, and then they facilitate people like me to come in and give us spaces to host things like this, and I really appreciate their time and effort. Who are we? We're a collective of game designers, artists, and designers working in and around Colorado. We're students, we're hobbyists, we're people who are trying to focus on mentoring the next generation of people to try to get into the games industry. Biggest goal for us is to close the gap of time from college all the way into the actual workforce, give you guys some skills, and hopefully just impart some knowledge along the way of like, hey, this is how we process things, this is how we think about things when we're thinking about them as professionals. Try and take that and take it as it is and go from there. So we're here to learn together, to expand our own knowledge, and to bridge the gap between old and new, and to push ourselves out of our own comfort zones. I know that one's a big thing for me, but also hopefully make some cool stuff along the way. So that's the most important thing as well, is I want to get you guys working. So in 2019, we ran 4 general events, which was pretty great, and 1 big community event that I was really, really pleased about. We cut November and December, mostly because of 2 different things. One, my company ended its life term in end of October, so I just really wasn't kind of in the mindset to be able to do November. And December, everybody's already gone for holidays and stuff, so why do one in December? What went well for us last year's, we grew the core audience. So from the very first incarnation, we had 16 people show up, and then we had 43 at the last event, which to me was like phenomenal. That was like incredible growth. I'm just glad to have the people. When we did the community game jam, we had 15 teams sign up, teams of 3, 1 team of 4, and 8 games was produced. And if you look at that and slice the pie anyway, that's actually, in my opinion, pretty decent numbers. I was really, really happy about that. All the groups, our biggest goal was to have our 30-day mentorship group, and all of the groups that asked for a mentor got one. And that wasn't going to happen without community involvement, without the people out here, so I was really, really appreciated that. The event space continues to be amazing. look, the TV's here now, everything's working. It was working for every other one, so I won't impart any other things. It's probably my MacBook, so no worries there, right? And then there was just great adoption from the indie game community at large, especially the Colorado brands, and great support for me, just like being able to ask questions to random people and just be like, yo, what am I doing wrong? How do I fix this? So what went wrong by itself? Well, the production quality for the live streams and the recording was not up to snuff by any means. Trying to get that going, but the lack of overall structure in the actual events itself didn't really drive confidence in the event. It's very hard to understand what was going to happen next, what we were going to be doing. Finding speakers month to month was definitely difficult at best. So a lot of the times it was very sporadic. It was a lot of pushing people and just being like, hey, can we do this right now? And that lands then a lot on my plate, and overall quality then kind of diminishes when you don't have a lot of time to prepare. And then, to be honest, the voting on the day of the game jam, in my opinion, just went too long, and that's totally my fault. We went for a solid 4 hours and playing the games. Probably could have cut it by at least an hour, but had a few too many to drink the night before, and everything just ran a little bit long after that. So how will we improve all of that this year? Well, better microphone setup. I have a lapel mic now. I'm hoping that that's the start of something. I'm starting a recording as well as a live stream, so if you can see it on the thing and it's all working, then great. Last time we were doing it off of a phone, and we had a separate microphone and a separate laptop recording different audio, so we had our ADR things together, and that did not work out at all. And then this year we've found speakers in advance, so again, we booked out the first 6 months of speakers. I'm hoping that we don't have too much difficulty going forward, especially on just like last minute cancellations and stuff like that too. So, but those things happen, and you got to be prepared for them, and kind of just go from there, just pick up the ball and keep rolling. What am I working on right now? So I've registered 2 companies. One is Cabinet, which is we'll go into a little bit later. I'm gonna need a logo for that, so if there's any artists in the crowd that wants a little bit of contract work, all right.
Great name, by the way.
Yeah, right. For an arcade cabinet company, Cabinet, I'll take it. And then the Rocky Mountain Game Developers Association, I've turned now into an LLC. Why have I turned the group into an LLC? Well, one of them is taxes. It makes it simpler for my books to be able to do it. I can split up certain things and make sure that I can be, tax writing off those correctly. But also then I can be paying people through the association, and they can be getting a 1099 form or a tax form. It's a bit of a headache, but it really helps me, especially for the next bit of liability. It's really important that, when you're just one person running something, it doesn't matter what it is, especially if you're trying to grow something into something else. It's important to just manage your liability as much as possible, whether that be like debt or, anything liable whatsoever. So in case anything did happen, it's against the company can go away, I don't incur any of those things. And then it's just, part of it's just like legitimacy. We can have that on our taxes. We're actually a company, and we're actually like trying to do something cool, especially when we're trying to do these bigger community events, like hiring in people from the community to try and help build out some of these bigger community events. Then that will really, really help us then going forward. The cabinet stuff is more on my own side. After Backflip folded, then I've been trying to figure out what I'm going to do next, and I really want to make a arcade cabinet for the new age. So we were talking about this earlier on. There's a bunch of companies in Japan who's already done this, but it's a distributed network of arcade cabinets. The idea is that you developers out there design and build your own games in Unity and Unreal. You can upload those EXEs to a server. We can pull those down and test those games on standardized hardware. Be all like mid-range stuff, nothing too heavy, nothing too big to keep costs down. Then those machines are then put into the world, and because they're on a distributed network, when we say, okay, cool, your game can go on our network, just like Steam does it, all of those cabinets pull all those games down, and now anybody around the country, around the place, wherever those things are, can start playing your games. And also then feeding money into them and trying to drive some revenue back towards everybody else. So the cool thing for me here is this is just the dumbest idea that I've ever had in my entire life. But for some reason, I just want to, it keeps tugging at me because I just keep wanting to do it. So my goal for this is that, I had a whole fucking thing about this, but who gives a shit? My whole thing about this is May is Boulder Startup Week from May 10th to May 15th. So, I'll also be trying to talk to people about getting in, helping out with some stuff, and trying to see where we can take that between the months of now to May to try and find some VC funding and then see if we can turn that into something as well. And again, I want to be hiring people out of the community. I don't want to be hiring people external to all of that as much as possible. And the biggest thing there is to try and put more funding back into all of you guys. What's going to happening in Colorado right now? Julian very kindly talked about this, but Global Game Jam is tomorrow. Starting tomorrow, or the 31st, my apologies, to the 2nd. You can look this up if you get that link and take a look at it. All these slides are going to go up, post them up into the Slack channels then later on today, so you'll be able to find all of these if you can't grab it right now. But we also then have this, somebody made this brand new site for the Colorado game devs stuff, which has a bunch of different meetings on it. So it's a really easy, handy tool now to just be able to see. So you don't have to go over to the event Slack channel, and you don't have to sift through it. It's a little bit more like, okay, cool, this is what's going on, this is what's going on. You can click on, they'll bring you to all of the different things going on there. So, Julian, who made this again?
This was Kit Burgess and Chad. Shoot, I don't remember Chad's last name.
Okay, well, cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Big shout out to those guys because again, we really appreciate it. So let's just have a chat, right? Like, what do you guys want to see out of the community this year? Is there any specific topic that you would like to hear about from this community in terms of speakers, in terms of different areas you would like to hear about? And should we do more game jams and community events? Game jams weren't really on my plan for this year, but we can always fit them into the bill if there's interest and everything else like that too. My whole thing is people are busy, schedules are tight, and I don't want to be overloading people with like events and other things going on as well. So, what do you guys think? Yeah, do it.
So, who here is interested in like drinking social events? So there's a group in Denver. There's a group in Denver every month that does Game Dev Drink Up, and they get 20-25 folks together at Mass Chaos Brewery and just kind of hang out and shoot the breeze. And yeah, you guys, like, there's a great structure up in Boulder with the meetups every month and the speakers and all that, but is anyone here looking for a social, more relaxed game? Okay, cool, let's chat.
Yeah, so that's on that calendar, isn't it, correct?
Yes.
This one, it's the...
Let's see.
Casual, no, not that one, not that. This one?
Actually, I got time. I can throw this in.
Do it.
For game dev.
Debugging?
Yeah. Right.
Okay. That would have
I don't
been...
have to do like print statements, like I'm talking about like step-by-step debugging, like website style debugging. Would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
I could actually talk about that along with. Does anyone here use like NUnit or anything for testing on their games? Do you guys build unit progression and all that? Would you be interested in talking on that?
I would. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Julian, we'll definitely talk about that. In terms of art-focused talks, but is there any specific topics that anybody would think that would be good for them? Like animation, is it pipeline work? Is it just like best practices? Like, is it all of the above, kind of that type of thing?
Is it like the producer side of things?
I want to hear some production stuff. Okay. Production. I did speak to one of my producer friends in Sally. He was getting married and then was moving to San Francisco. So sadly losing a good person in the community for that type of stuff. But there is more, so we'll definitely try and look that up. How do people feel about running little game jams as well? I know the global game jam is coming up, but would anybody like to do something more? Yeah. Yeah?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, all right.
The students are pretty into it.
No, where you get like into a group and you make games like over the weekend.
Yeah.
And you see like that'd be cool.
No, we did. Yeah, like it depends. Like, did anybody like the last format? Did anybody have any reservations? Would anybody like to try and do that again, or should we go for like the shorter term, like burn it over a weekend and let's just do it?
I think a weekend would be more.
Okay.
In a physical place.
Yeah, I think that's the call. Like, let's do an actual physical location and get everybody together. Cool. Sweet, guys. All right. Well, it's kind of all we had, but look, every gratitude to Shay that he was ever so willing to do it. You know what I mean? Look, certain things don't allow you to do it, so that's that's kind of what ends up happening. So no, he didn't. Yeah. He did send me his talk title, which was
It's just making it from there.
I got a great idea.
Yes.
He has a good GDC talk on YouTube that we can watch on the like the bad side of RMG, which looks kind of interesting.
So we could definitely do that. That's definitely a play.
Or just
I actually threw something together that I was meant to do in February, but we can do now, or we can watch a talk on randomness.
I would love to see your thing.
Okay, all right. His talk was meant to be on the indispensable of disposable playtesters. My fucking language skills are horrendous, but long and short of it, we'll see if we can then switch times. So he'll do February, and then I'll do right now. So bear with me on this, by the way. Again, I was halfway through all the research of all this, and I kind of just had to throw things together. I wanted to expand on this whole thing and talk about, hey, this is how I would structure it from a spreadsheet side. This is how I'd structure it from a data side. But we didn't really get to that, so we're just going to talk about the sandbox. What is your absolute edges of your box when you're thinking about a crafting system and trying to go about designing and also building for that? And I mean that from the art side. So how do I classify a crafting system? Well, a crafting system to me is just like a simple act of inputs and outputs. All it really boils down to is a currency exchange, and a lot of these come down to like one-to-many, many-to-many, or one-to-one relationships. And how you exchange those items then is what adds the layers of, and then defines what your crafting system is and tries to put that in its own box based on everything else. But there's many different ways that we're going to look at to kind of skin that cat. So the major genres that I see that support crafting loops, some just very generic-y type of stuff, is resource management games, survival games, and simulation games. And we kind of can classify that if we look at some of the games that I've played over time, is like Rust, Minecraft, Terraria, Don't Starve, DayZ, Heyday, Starbound, RimWorld, SimCity, Megalopolis, EVE Online, World of Warcraft, Skyrim, and Overcooked. Does anybody have any other games here that they could think of that they like playing in their crafting games, or that they would classify as a crafting game?
Sure.
Or even a game that has crafting in it. It doesn't have to be specifically a crafting game.
Yeah, sure.
Subnautica, yes.
Horizon Zero Dawn.
Yes, Horizon Zero Dawn, absolutely. No Man's Sky, for sure. Are any on this make sense to you? Does any of these put questions in your head of is that really that kind of game? Cool. So yeah, I try to classify different things just by those types of themes, the same way Steam does it all with the little meta tags and everything like that nowadays, and then try to then put those things into boxes. So from here I have the hardcore to casual, and the resource management to simulation. So the idea is to try and then map where I feel like those games work together, try to make a cluster of all of those things, and then see, okay, well, these games are kind of in these types of areas that if I want to be going in that direction, this is what I need to be imitating or really riffing off of, and then on the other side. So I have a few different games here. Go on, Julian.
So simulation versus resource management, how do you define that axis?
Part of it is to do with the amount of items inside of the game itself, right? So for Escape from Tarkov that I have over here, or Subnautica, or Raft, right? All of those things are really based around singular individual items. You rarely have more than 5 of a single item, and if you do, it's about 10 at the most. Whereas on the right-hand side of resource management, you'll see up here is Factorio, Ark, Conan Exiles, and this other game called Autonauts. The big thing here is that those games deal with thousands of items rather than just the individuals. So it comes down to value, right? In Escape from Tarkov, I see an item and I'll see one of these things. I may only see one of those things every 10 plays. And when I see that one thing, I'm like, boom, I know that this is valuable. I want this thing right now. Whereas on the other side, it's I got 10,000 gold bars in Factorio. It's like, well, fuck it, we're gotta get to 1 million, so, you know, just keep producing them. That's kind of how I look at those types of things then.
So with resource management, it's sort of, the question is limited slots and how do you value things versus simulation, you're picking up whatever you can and trying to do things with it?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. There's definitely, look, there's different axes and avenues to do, but on the simplest scope of side of things, to just get a basic map, but this is where I'm just like drawing the line.
Hardcore casual axes would denote like scarcity of actual objects.
Scarcity, but also kind of difficulty of game, right? So I would say Factorio is like a very involved game, right? Whereas same thing with Escape from Tarkov or Subnautica are pretty involved. Escape from Tarkov, you die, you lose everything, right? Whereas Factorio, you kind of like recover because everything's a little bit more automated. But if you look down here, we have like Animal Crossing would be on the casual side, but you're still on kind of the resource management side of things too, which you realistically should probably be farther along here because you're not dealing with the tens of thousands of items, but you're constantly kind of gaining items at the same time. So not perfect, but give you an idea of just like a mental map to be able to say, when I'm going to go out into the world and I want to analyze, hey, I want to build this thing, but I want to look at it in a little bit more of a classified way. This is a good way to kind of mental map those types of things. What are your fundamentals for a crafting system? So what are your edges of your box, right? So progression within the system is really important. Crafting constraints is obviously important too. Like these are the types of things of what tools do I need to be able to do it? Is time a constraint? How does all of that type of things work? Understanding the end product from the inputs. Now that's more of a user-focused thing, or the fidelity of your actual action to craft. Invest and express or expression through crafting can be very important, especially for more social games, but also just it helps people to drive. You can be building the same item but in a number of different ways, and it helps you to then feel more invested in your character and customize things down the line. There's also different ways that you can define a recipe, and this is more nebulous. I think the thing that we always think about crafting loops, or especially crafting style games, is we get an interface that says, I need these 3 things, I need some quantities of those 3 things, and I get some output that's based on those. And that's a very well-defined crafting system. But there are levels to all of that, and we'll get into it over time. And then the variability of what comes out is like, can we get things that are different rarities? Can we get things that maybe give me a little bit more of a special item, or something that gives extra value to something at like 5% chance? Those are the types of things that can build some nice little bit of connective tissue and a little bit more intrigue, and doesn't really just dole your crafting loop like completely out, because people are going to tend to be doing these things quite often. So you have to take that path of like, is it based on just purely just the item, or do I want some intrigue within the actual crafting level itself? So how do we then define what are the edges of the box then for progression systems? Well, leveling up is obviously a big one, right? You can either be leveling up a skill, you can be leveling up a specific attribute, you can be leveling up just your player itself, and those are the types of things that you can use to unlock new potential for crafting recipes. So think of like World of Warcraft professions. I can be leveling up my herbalism skill. That's a specific skill, but I need to be doing that over and over again. Whereas I could be leveling up my player, and that gives me access to new areas that then all of a sudden gives me different things. Resource unlocking then, a lot of these things break into 2 different categories: explicit things and implicit rewards as well. So an explicit in terms of resource unlocking is like, as a player, you just cannot detect, let's say you're playing Minecraft and you could just never see gold. You could never see gold or diamond ore at all until you actually got the pickaxe to do it, or you got some specific item. You met a specific criteria to be able to do those types of things. Whereas an implicit goal would be more like, I see those things and I want those things because I know that they're higher resource tiers, and now all of a sudden I have a goal set in my mind to say, how do I get to that point? With recipe unlocking, we can tie those things in different ways, right? Yeah, so some implicit ones might drop recipes over time, versus some explicit games might be, here's a quest reward, you need to go out and do this thing, and the game is telling you you need to complete this quest to be able to gain this item, to be able to make these other things. They can also be achieved through just like level unlocks as well. But the other side of it too is implicit games can say, hey, I just want you to go out into the world and I just want you to explore like No Man's Sky. I want you to go out and explore, and if you do explore, you might randomly come across these different items that might be able to then use as crafting patterns to be able to now say, hey, I can now go and make these things because I went and was just discovering the world itself. So the game itself is not telling you to explore, but you know that you need to be exploring to find these things, and you might be finding different ones over time. Whereas the other one is, hey, do this thing right now, this is what I want you to do, and then I will give you that item. The other side of this is certain things of like prerequisites to crafting. So think of it like, I want you to, Starbound does a really good job of this as well. It's like, you have one specific item that you use for mining pretty much all of the time. But over time, you need to gain other items and build other items to be able to then upgrade your drill basically to then mine harder items itself. The biggest thing there is that, oh my god. The biggest thing there is that you're building a chain of production. You're basically telling the player that the overall meta goal is to constantly be upgrading this tool so you can be gaining better resources. But you have other goals that are underneath it in like a little bit of a tree that say, yeah, but to first get that item, I actually need to be able to then craft these 3 items, and then to craft those 3 items, I actually need to be doing this other thing. And that progression then gives players then these short, medium, and long-term goals that say, long-term goal is, I need to get this thing upgraded. Shorter term goals are, how do I get these other items within the tree to be able to then prereq into those other things. Mechanical changes then can be important too. So think Minecraft, right? Minecraft, when you're away from a crafting table, you only have a 4-slot crafting table. So it really limits the amount of things that you can be crafting at one time. As soon as you move over to one of those objects, though, all of a sudden, you've unlocked potential in crafting recipes. So you might have all the resources, but you might have the availability of doing it without those tools. And having those tools then can change the mechanics and allow you then to kind of expand over time. Those mechanic changes then can be used as gating objects. So it says like, if I want to get the furnace, I have to already have made the crafting table, because there's no way for me to make that with stone out of my 4x4. So my prereq to get to that is to get the crafting table. To get the crafting table, I need to be getting my wood, right? You'll notice I go back to Minecraft a lot because I fucking love that game, I tell you.
Do you want us to like throw questions and comments while you're talking? Or
Yes, please. Yeah, absolutely. Because otherwise, like, I feel like, throwing this together, so I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head my research and my own experiences and stuff. So, and this is a collaborative thing. I want you guys just to stop me and just go in. There's no point in me just rambling on a lot of the time. You know what I mean? So
with your breakdown here, the sort of 2 ways that you can unlock new crafting, this is an interesting tie-in to game design, because it goes back to player goals. What drives the player as they're playing the game? What keeps them coming back? And with crafting systems, what you see here, one of these is goal-driven. And that's the type of player to where you tell them in advance, you can do this, this, and this, and they are driven to complete, right? There are people that like to check things off the list. They like to know sort of what they're getting into, know what the quests are, and then go and do them. Versus in something like Minecraft, where you can't see what you can craft until you find items, that's a delight, right? And there are other players that are driven by that. I like to discover things. I don't like everything to be laid out. I don't like to have a path. That's boring for me. I just want to see what happens, and when I find a new crafting system, I just get an incredible payback emotionally for that. So this targets very different players.
yeah, totally. And again, I think it plays back into this intrinsic versus extrinsic goal setting. You know what I mean? Is the game telling you to do this, or are you just kind of discovering as you go and then figuring out that you can do this? How do I get that thing? I can't get it right now. What do I need to do to get that thing?
I would say also, like, one of the interesting things that's kind of developed in crafting, especially in like games like The Witcher and Horizon Zero Dawn, it's like, have you ever played a game where you're like, I want to stay in the world, but I don't want to start the next big quest? Oh yeah, and that's where the crafting comes in real handy, because it's basically a tiny little mini quest where it's like, yeah, I can like kind of go around and explore and gather the things to make useful stuff, and I still have purpose in the game that's not like okay, ready to take on the next like boss, whatever. Which to me is kind of an interesting evolution of the crafting. It's like that's not the sole purpose of like why the player's doing it. Sometimes it's like intermission.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
I need a little intermission.
Oh, you're totally right. That's a great point. The fact of like pace of combat can only be kept up for so long. To give you that moment of sit back, do your thing, like actually sit and resource manage a little bit more, really be a lot.
I think in some ways too that kind of like ties into the exploration of these sort of worlds. Like in Horizon Zero Dawn, it's a beautiful place.
Mhm.
It's got all kinds of crazy stuff to look at. The developers obviously blood, sweat, and tears to create all that visually. So it's like, why waste all of those assets when you can get them looking at it? So,
I'm terrible, so I haven't played either of those games. I haven't played The Witcher, I haven't played Horizon Zero Dawn. So when the PS5 comes out, if somebody wants to sell their PS4 with both of those
you
games.
just missed The Witcher was like sale for $12.99 on
Wow.
PlayStation Store, dude.
Well, the offer still stands. I will buy your consoles. Please, let me get back into the old generation of games. When we get into crafting constraints now, there's a certain different things. Like World of Warcraft says you can only have 2 professions. The biggest thing that they have there is that it's a social interaction point where it says you can't just be like a RuneScape player and no life it and level everything up yourself and never have to interact with another player. They force you to say, no, if you don't have what you need, you have to actually go out and talk to other players and try to interact with them and build more an ecosystem, and it feeds back into their economy. There are so many players that just play the trading game. That's all they do. They level their professions and buy and sell different things, and that was me. I'm a spreadsheet master. I love that stuff. But then there are other people that do the hardcore raiding, and they just do their prerequisites on their crafting or on their professions to get to the point where then they can raid and do all the right things. But all those resources come from different players, and that social interaction is really important for that game. The other side of this is, can you only craft certain objects within certain worlds and certain zones? So let's say I wanted to grow. I was doing like something like Stardew Valley-esque type of game, right, where I had to grow certain things, but I have to only grow it. I can only have this thing grow on a full moon, or I can only have it grow at night, or I can only have it grow in the desert. Those are the types of constraints that allow you to then try to push players into the box, but also drive them around a map a little bit more and add a little bit more progression and sprinkle a little bit more discoverability. Because all of a sudden now you can say, those items don't even exist in any of the other lands, they only exist over here. And if you don't have the right level prereq to be able to even live in those zones, well, you might be having a hard time. So there's your goal setting again. Go back, level up your character, level up your skills. Now all of a sudden you can move into these new lands and get these new items. Time gating is a really big thing too. Does it take time to craft your items? Is it long timers like in mobile games or even in certain other digital games nowadays? Or is it more like still short-term timers, but it still has a gate to it? So RuneScape is a really big one on this. People manage their XP per hour a lot, right? And it's all about, it takes me 3 seconds to mine a node. Well, that 3 seconds multiplied by the 10,000 times that they need to do it, and then they end up getting these metrics out of like, how long is it going to take me to achieve these long-term goals that I need to be getting. Resource consumption then is a big one too. There's only a couple of different ways you can look at this really. Is like, most crafting systems say, take all of my inputs, smush them together, they're gone, I have this new item. Other games will say, I have this one item that is totally non-durable at all, it has no durability, and I will always get that thing back, but all of these other items will go. And other games will say, this item specifically, or some of these items, may only be able to be used X amount of times. And if they're only able to be used X amount of times, at least you get a little bit of life out of them, but you're still going to have to go out and do those things again. You can build that into your crafting system then to go and say, well, those items with heavy durability or higher amounts of durability are rarer items, are more difficult to get to, and because you can then see that those things are in your way, they innately build a rarity tier into your crafting system itself, and the value of those items increase in the player's mind, and it's really good then to try and etch that out. The other side of this, and the last one, is a luck chance. So in many MMOs, items can fail a craft. So you put in your items, and it might tell you you only have a 20% chance to actually craft this thing unless you put in like luck stones or something else. If that fails, all those items are gone, and you have to go back to the start again and find all those resources and start doing them again. Go on.
So, interesting sort of question for the group off of luck chance, because luck is a place that a lot of companies are monetizing. We see that a lot in games. So you get a certain number of loot boxes for free, but you can buy more. That increases your luck. Or, there's all kinds of examples of this. But basically, if you don't want to take a chance, you can pay to get a better chance or to have something happen for free. Has anyone seen that in crafting, to where people are sort of monetizing luck with crafting systems? You might have a chance to fail unless you pay 3,000 rupees, which you can buy for $2 in our store, and that increases your luck chance.
I feel like early Secret World had something like that in its crafting system for a brief moment, and then it vanished. And I don't know if that's because people got so frustrated by it destroying the things that they were, trying to create, especially at higher level in-game content. They're making these sort of legendary items, and then it fails after they spent however long trying to get those items. I think they reconsidered the design of it. I do remember something similar, trying to plug it in, and it would be like, you'd be like, oh darn it!
No, totally. There is a few different things. Like RuneScape does this pretty well, and you can abstract it down into the sense of you have a cooking stat. I take one fish and I put it over a camping fire. Depending on that cooking stat, I could burn that fish. It's technically crafting. I take one in, I put it on into a tool, and I get an item back out. It might not be the result I want, but based on what my actual balance of my skill is, I might hit a threshold that says, tuna I can do at level 20 and I will never burn them, but swordfish, I'll burn those things like 40% of the time. So it's important then to understand that like over time as you're leveling those things up, you get some reward and benefit out of the exhaustive like effort that your player is putting in. All right. So the user understanding of products is a really big one here too. And this kind of falls down into how do you abstract your items kind of either closer or away to real life. Now, the two classifications I have usually for this is it as tangible as what we do in real life, or is it fantasy as far as possible? So am I doing things more like, what was that game that came out in the Xbox Game Pass? It was like Skyrim, but in space. Outer Worlds, right? So Outer Worlds has a bunch of different weird items that you're like, I kind of know what these things are. Like it says med something, but I don't really know, and that builds into something that I know it heals me, but I don't exactly tangibly know what those items are. That falls somewhere in and around here for me. Whereas there's some real crazy things that have fallen out here. But then my biggest example that I always go back to is Heyday. If nobody's ever played Heyday on the phone and you hate mobile games, just give it a go. I'm telling you, just give it a go. The game is brilliant, and it drives home this whole idea. Their abstraction, I'll give you the example, is how to make an apple pie. My prerequisite items are 3 apples, 2 wheat, 1 egg, and syrup. But I also need a baking oven, or a pie oven as they call in their game. Think about it, if I'm making an apple pie, I take the wheat and the egg, and that makes the base. I use the apples then as my filler, and I throw some syrup on top of that, and I bake it. All these items are very tangible, they make sense, but they help the player to build that mental map from that end item all the way down to the starting item, so that when they come back to these types of skills again, you say, go make me a cherry pie, they instantly already know, like, hey, this is what I need to have to go and make those certain things, right? I need to get cherries, I probably need that wheat, I probably need that egg. Maybe I need syrup, I don't really know, but let's find out when we get to those points.
Do you think that those kinds of systems are actually handy in helping players intuit new recipes without actually having to find them?
The onboarding is really big here because like wheat builds into bread, the most fundamental staple of humanity, right? And then over time, then you're able to take those different things and make crazier things based on the bread itself. And you kind of just pick up these things and intuit over time because of the way that they're able to onboard that. And again, this comes back to then the tools, right? You don't get the baking oven until like later on in the game, like mid to late game. So you're going to be noticing different things that you're able to do with your items beforehand, but as soon as you've unlocked this, you've unlocked new potential recipes. So this becomes a larger meta goal for the player, whereas maybe just getting apples in itself is more of like a midterm goal depending on where you are within the game itself.
So, where do you fall on, we have real life, but where do you fall on sort of level of detail? Because obviously, this is real world items, but this is not actually how you make an apple pie, right? When you actually make an apple pie, you've got other ingredients you have to worry about. You know, maybe you have, I don't even know, water and baking soda and cinnamon and all of these other little things. Do games butter? Yeah.
It's all about that abstraction, and then it comes down to, are you, again, back to the simulation side of things, how close to that abstraction layer are you really going, right? Like I read a thing about Knitting Simulator 2014, and it was actually a game where you had to physically, in the game, move the needles and points to then knit within the game. But then you play a game like Rust or something, and there's not knitting, but it was a Nintendo Nintendo game, Nintendo stylus game on the 3DS, and you just tap the screen at the right time, and it does all the knitting for you. And those are two levels of abstraction, but you're still doing the same action. So the fidelity is a little bit different, but you have to think about, like, what do you want your player to be focused on? Because I could bet you if you told them, here's a bigger game, but then you have to actually sit there and physically, like, move these things and knit, people are going to get very frustrated about that one part rather than things. But if that's the game, you go all in on it. So it comes down to, where is your abstraction there?
That would be Warframe.
Oh,
The
yeah.
crafting system in Warframe is crazy.
That's another game that's really good. Free to play still, right?
It's still free to play, yeah. They don't have any loot boxes.
Fucking thank God. Jesus Christ.
Well,
Fair play to them, they made it work.
Oh my god. Well, the way that they made it work is the crafting system is so, like, complicated and just grindy, just crazy. It's the most complex crafting, one of the most complex ones I've ever seen. And it's also the most time consuming. And you're just like, you look at the estimates that people post online, it's like, how long it will actually take you to build this thing through gameplay. And you're like, oh my god, here's $10. I'll just buy it from the marketplace. And, yeah, it works out super well for them.
You get those free-to-play schmucks that are like, no, I'm not giving you my schmeckles. You're not getting anything, motherfucker. No way. So, the other side of this comes back to what we were talking about before, is, do your products then, are they designed to fit your game? And these are two examples from games that I was working on in the past, right, where I once worked on a game where the user could craft a full kitchen renovation, and it was inside of a city builder. The problem was that the player was never able to see inside of the building. So you did all of this work, like a tremendous amount of effort went into building this whole thing, a ton of different prereq items, and you never got any payoff on it. You're never able to customize your kitchen to even see it, but you're literally never even able to get into the building to be able to do it. So the users who craft these items become very confused about the whole thing, because they were like, well, where are these things going? I just spent all this time. Like, the whole thing there was that the invest was there, but the express wasn't there, right? I was able to kind of show, get them to do the action, but the payoff isn't there, and that's really important, and to have that payoff, especially if they're going to be putting a lot of time into something. Another example was another city builder game where the first item in a metropolitan city, so a game that you were building that looked, if you took a top-down thing of this city itself, was bread, right? Seemed reasonable at the start, until you then get into the whole thing, and 5 levels deep, your town is still only asking for bread. That's all they want. They just want bread, and everybody lives off of bread. And we're talking like days into the game, where you're still just dealing with very singular items. So the thing there is that, like, how are you able to connect with what's really going on? And it builds this disconnect in your mind of, like, is this a city? Like, am I really here? Why aren't they doing something else? Can I not be producing other resources? What am I doing wrong, or what's the thing? And you're not showing players then the depth that could be in your game at that point. Because at that point they weren't onboarding quick enough, but they also, the items itself just didn't really fit the usability of the game. Or if I'm giving you if it was the medieval times and it was, you're making bread and you're making bread for 5 days, I'll be like, fuck yeah, dude, my people aren't starving. I got bread and I got beer, we good, right? But in this case, it was like, this is boring. Like, I don't know what's going on. I want to do more. And it sucked. It really did suck. So it's very important to also think about that. It's not just about how the system is structured. It's about the design of the items and the fidelity of what you need to be doing with those items inside the context of your game world itself. Invest and express through crafting. So Minecraft has dyes. They introduced you the ability to dye your armor. It's really weak, in my opinion, in the base game. But if you look at the modding community and the things that they've been able to take from there, that's where the real richness has come in. Think of a game where I can make a sword, but I might find a hilt in a nice dungeon and it's a broken sword or something like that. But it has all of the same stats of every other sword, but all of a sudden, because I can use that thing as an item, I have a different sword than everybody else. I have my own little invest and express within that whole thing, so I can have a little bit more personality in my items. Same thing with like patterns on items and capes. Embroidery. These things are really easy to do because they just tend to be like an art swap, right? You know what I mean? Give me a different, bunch of different crests. Like, again, to go back to World of Warcraft, the tabard, right? It's the same tabard, it's the same model, but it's different art, and I can achieve different art based on either the reputation goals that I get, or the achievement goals that I get, or the guilds that I'm in, and those things drive personality into the player. They show themselves off better in their outer worlds, and it gives them also a singular thing that they can then build off of all of their other armors and all of their other items based on, right? Certain times you just, especially in World of Warcraft, you might find a specific armor set that you're like, I want that armor set, and I want something else that looks good with that armor set. That's like a linchpin item. Those are the types of things that say, I'm going to take that thing and build something else around that. And those are great because then it can drive more discoverability, more exploration into the game, especially if you're sprinkling them out and they're more of an achievement to kind of get. So my whole thing here is, if I was going to give you an example, is to say, let's say if I was in Ironforge within World of Warcraft, I can only craft certain, I get access to certain patterns for my capes, and I get nicer dyes, but they're always specific to Ironforge stuff because that's in the theme of the world, that's what they have you there, right? But if I go over to the other side of the world, I go over to Orgrimmar, they have different things there, it's more specific to those places, and then maybe different towns around the places have different things. That's the kind of cool stuff, because if you had something like No Man's Sky, and all of a sudden you went to a random planet and there was an NPC there that was like, I'm fucking Joe Schmo making capes and stuff like that, but they have something different that nobody else has seen before. Well, now that drives somebody then to see that and say, hey, where'd you get that? Oh, hey, it was over on this place. And you build that social interaction in as well. Those are great as well for K-Factor, because you can then, people will make guides, they'll put those online, and you can then drive some more focus into all of those types of things too. The definition of a recipe is really important. Again, the relationship types can be, very core all across the things: one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-one, and many-to-many. And what I'm talking about there is just the items, inputs to outputs. Can I take, one like a geode or a stone or something like that, like a big rock, as one item, and then break that and make many items of, like rocks or smaller stones or something like that. So, it comes down to your heart's content of how those things work. Randomness of crafting recipes can be really good in two different things. They build suspense into the player's mind, and they can build some superstition within the player's mind as well. The biggest thing here is like Legend of Zelda's cooking loop is really cool. The same thing happens, I think, in Don't Starve as well. It's like, I have 4 slots. I can put whatever items I really want to in those whole things within limit of the game mechanics, but I get something out that is reasonable to those types of things. And I might get something I don't really care about, but there's a little bit of time on the in-between of the crafting, and I might get something that's superior to anything else that I could get. Stardew Valley does a good look of that. They show you like a silver star or a gold star. And once you get a gold star item, that thing has more tangible value. It feels better to the player, and they feel better for getting it out. Even though they were doing the exact same action that they would do, kind of devolves the monotony of constantly being crafting. And it gives you this moment of every time you are crafting and pulling that lever, you're seeing what the slot machine is going to tell you. Are you going to get 777s, or are you just going to get nothing, right? The two other sides of this are heavily defined crafting systems and loosely defined crafting systems. So what I mean by this is a heavily defined one is this example here in Rust, right? These improvised balaclavas will always be 15 cloth. Cloth is not different in any sense. There's not different colored cloth. It will always be 15 cloth. And as soon as you put that in, that's what you get. It's heavily defined. Loosely defined can be more like redstone in Minecraft. It's a little bit more abstract. It's saying to the player, here's a grab bag of mechanics that you can put together to then try to build something bigger. A lot of the times though here you gotta be careful because developers don't really intend for players to be able to do the certain things that they do, but that's almost great because now all of a sudden players are discovering the boundaries of what they can do with those items. Same thing here with, you can even abstract it down to placing blocks. Has anybody ever built a mob spawner like killer in Minecraft or anything else like that? Yeah. So the developers didn't intend for anybody to be able to do any of these types of things and use water physics from the game mechanics to then push mobs and then have them drop into certain areas, specific block heights, to kill them off to then use those things as farms. But because players were able to use the base mechanics, place those objects in the right way, they crafted their ways to these success points, and over time that just builds like a better mental map. It increases, you know, the retention of users, but then again those players then can go off, teach other players how to do those things, and drive more interest within your game because it adds complexity to the whole thing too. So it's just something to think about, is that crafting doesn't have to be always like a very limited like input to output. It can be a little bit more I don't know, what's the word, I guess. Yeah, a little bit more organic. I had ergonomic in my head, and I'm like, that's not the right word. The last thing I will say on this is the other side comes back to the resource management slide versus the simulation slide, right? Automation versus single production. This comes back to scale and comes back to like, how do you want to scale your game? Factorio drives the player to have thousands of these items and to manage those things constantly, so you have to build that into your structure. But a game like Escape from Tarkov, you might only see that item 3 times within like your 1 month of play, and the value that you feel out of that one item versus those 1,000 items very much differ within the player's mind. So the quantities don't always align. So it's just important to think about what do those means and how often are you dropping those things. Automation you can do kind of however you want. Those are game to game specifics. Obviously becomes more organic in terms of how you go about all of those things, but it's just a way to think about it. It's like, as a player, I've got 30,000 gold bars, I need another 5k. It's very muted, it's very deliberate, but it's very clinical. And that's great for a different player type, but then there's some people who are like, oh crap, I just found a physical Bitcoin. Like, I need to get out of here right now. And that tension level then starts rising, and you have these moments of, you know, a larger bump in player experience. And with all this though, balance is just the biggest key, and you got to find those and fine tune like your actual economy inputs and resources, and which I was hoping to kind of go into and show spreadsheets and talk about actual like structure, like how you would do this out physically in a spreadsheet and put all this theory into actual practice. And sadly, we don't have time for any of that. So major point of reference is this document right here from the digitalhumanities.org. Go read this. I really pulled a lot of stuff from here because I was like, oh damn, they're thinking about stuff on like a different level that I didn't realize. And there's tons of stuff on that, not specifically just for games. They have a ton of different stuff all over the place. But I take massive liberties from this, including just my own thinkings about, you know, game design and stuff like that. So that's the end of the talk, and that's kind of the end of everything I have today. But again, thank you so much everybody for coming out, especially, you know, I mean, for the first one of the year. I really, really appreciate it. So yeah, that's it. So please feel free, if you want me to elaborate on any of these topics, talk about them at all, even if you just want to talk amongst each other on any of these things, like by all means, let's go back through them, you know. I know it's just like wall of stuff and just text and everything like that. But you know, the part of the point of why I build slides like this with a bunch of different information is because I tend to talk a lot. I want to be able to just post these slides. You guys can go look at them afterwards, read through the actual deliberation of them all, and then if you want to come back to me and talk about it later on, by all means. But that's really it. You know, hopefully 2020 is aiming to be a really good year for us. I did post the speaker list, the current speaker list here, as well as in the Slack channel, but also in the email that I sent out as well. Yeah, I know. But I knew that this was right here, so. So February we'll figure out. I'll try and get Shay back for that one, that whole thing. March 19th is going to be number 7. We've got Patrick Belanca, who's very passionate. He loves experiential game design. He will talk your ear off about this indie game that he played on the weekend that he absolutely loves. And he talks about it in this fine detail that I really, really enjoy. April 23rd, then we have Neil Edwards. Again, good friend of mine, mentor for me. I love that man to death. He's taught me a lot, but he started his own UX company and basically has grown that thing massively. They had a contract with Epic last year that just ended. May 21st, we have our Meredith Wilson, who's I was talking about before, very unique game designer in the whole sense of like her background really drives the home that she's able to look at numbers and data better than most people are. Like usually we're just like fucking freeballing half of the stuff. But she's able to take that, like the player experience of when she's playing and raw player data and really mash those two together and make something much better. Max Estevez, he was one of the longer tenured people at Backflip, but he worked on Dragon Veil solely. So that game has survived 8 years in the App Store. It's one of the longest running games on the App Store. And hopefully will still be going now after I think the license got bought by a different company. But he was managing live ops on a large team and still producing money on a legacy game. So the man's live ops stuff like that, especially in our industry in mobile, very, very important. And then on the July 23rd, we have a guy named Red Vonix. He likes to go by Red Vonix. I don't actually know his real name because he doesn't tell me his real name, but he's been living and working as a contract game developer in Colorado for damn near 30 years. So I don't know many people who are as tenured as that, especially to have people like I've only been here 5 years, so most people I know have only been here about 5 to 2 years at most. So it'd be good to get a Colorado vet in here and just talk about things. For excuse me, August, September. Sorry, did you have a question? Oh, my bad. August, September, October, and November have not been set just yet, but I am looking for people who specifically do things like board game developers, music for video games. I have, again, 1 or 2 leads on that. Business development is something I've been trying to get in, so I've been talking to Z, I've been talking to Julian Ferver, I've been trying to get these people to be like, hey, when's a day that you guys can just come in and talk to us? Like, how do you start something? How do you self-publish? How do you do any of these types of things? One, how do you build relationships with these companies like Apple and Google as a small studio? Because those guys have done it, and those are the types of things that are really important, especially when you're small. If you can get in and talk to somebody and be kind of jovial with them, maybe even just grease their skins a little bit, it can really help. Pitching to investors is also important, especially for people who are trying to be hobbyists, trying to build in, or maybe students who are trying to make their own teams, anybody who just wants to try and do this themselves. And then I want more engineering-focused talks and kind of art-driven style talks, so people who are specific more to this, because a lot of what we have here is a lot of game design and a lot of talking about games, a lot of theory. I'd like to try and start getting into some more nitty-gritty stuff as well. And then the last thing I want to do is anybody who's wanting to do workshops, these would be paid events. These would be things that you would actually have to go and pay for a ticket. They would be workshops in the same sense of like, we're going to live code today. We're going to sit down and we're going to build a game and we're going to walk you through the flow of stuff. I have one called Quick Asteroids. So if anybody wants a crash course in Unity, get a character up and running, get a game going, and then try to evolve on those things, we're going to be doing that probably like mid-year. So if anybody is interested in something like that, please be in contact with me. The very, very last thing I have here is, and this is probably the last I'm going to talk about it. I started a Patreon for this event itself. The whole biggest goal here is, there's a few things of why to pay for this, but the real reason is right here. 30% of the money that gets donated into this Patreon account will be doled out to the community, almost like a hedge fund for the community itself. So if you need an engineer to help build something for your game, but you can't afford to actually do it yourselves, if you need to find an artist or an animator to help polish your product, you need to maybe hire like a legal advisor for a little bit of time, but you just don't have the capital to do that. The hope is that this fund will become enough money to be able to fulfill some of those needs as necessary, as based towards the end of the year. And again, that comes back to this whole thing of, I want to be paying people from the group, right? If there is somebody who needs an artist and an animator to help polish, we got people to pull, right? We got connections, and you have a central community that you can come and talk to and say, hey, I'm working on this thing, but I'm having some hard times on this side of things. I could really use a helping hand, or a consultant, or somebody else. And this, I'm hoping, is going to be a way to do it. I understand the economic side of the world nowadays, so this is not a push to go and say, hey, fucking come fund this whole stuff. But if you do have a couple of bucks, you do like what we do here, come throw it, you know what I mean, come help us out. It doesn't have to be long term, but I am hoping that 30% kickback to the community is going to be enough money to be worth it at some point. Maybe not this year, but maybe next year or something else like that down the line. So once again, guys, thank you so much for coming. Much appreciated, and enjoy the rest of the snacks. There's tons of food and stuff. Just grab anything. If you want to take it and leave, then absolutely, by all means. All right, enjoy yourselves. Okay, have the rest of your day.